In July 2011, South Sudan became the world's youngest nation. As church bells rang out at midnight, thousands of people celebrated in the streets, the bells drowned out by honking car horns, wild screams of delight and the sound of pumping music. The people hoping they had finally turned their backs on 5 decades of conflict, estimated to have killed over 1.5 million people. In the day, dozens of world leaders attended a ceremony in the capital Juba to mark the new beginning, as the South ceded from Sudan in the north.
As the President of the Republic of South Sudan,
I shall be faithful
and
bear true allegiance to the Republic of South Sudan.
Despite the new start, though, border clashes continued with the north. And then, in 2013, the south itself was engulfed in civil war, mainly between the country's two largest ethnic groups, the Dinkas and the Nuers, killing thousands more. It came as President Salva Kiir, an ethnic Dinka, fired his entire cabinet, accusing his Vice President Riek Machar, a Nuer, of leading a failed coup against him. 2 years later came a peace deal signed in August 2015, and Mr Machar returned from exile to be sworn in as Vice President under a unity government before fleeing the country again just a few months later as he was sacked amid renewed fighting. The country remains racked with violence, despite having so much going for it. It is rich in oil, but is one of the least developed countries in the world. 1 in 7 children dying before the age of 5. Well, Bastien Renouy and Elodie Cousin revisit South Sudan for France 24.
Graph hot. Listen.
Okay, listen up. We're going to patrol through this village on foot. Section 1, you follow me through the houses. Wait for my signal. Keep your weapons ready. This is how it goes here. Understood?
Nepalese peacekeepers keep watch over this UN camp in Juba. They are protecting 28,000 South Sudanese, internally displaced victims of an ongoing civil war. These camps were targeted by government troops during clashes in July 2016. The peacekeepers were outnumbered. 2 of them were killed along with 20 civilians.
So this patrol is done to collect the information about security situations and to build the confidence in our own troops, and also to build the sense of security in the public people. And also at this area, the 200 meters outside this UN house perimeter is declared as the weapon-free zone. So implement this. We are patrolling this area.
Every day, the soldiers patrol ethnic Bari villages. In July, families here were caught in the crossfire as attacks were carried out in the camp just behind their homes. South Sudan's President Salva Kiir and his forces are Dinka, the largest ethnic group in the country. But most of the people in the UN camp are Nuer, the ethnicity of opposition leader Riek Machar. Captain Mala visits with villagers to gather local knowledge. But the village representative fears for their lives and demands better protection.
We found that there are some other army government staffs come and just make some other disturbances. And other guys from the POCs, the criminal, they come and loot the area. As soon as you people left and the Simbak were brought in, we found that there are a lot of difficulties because they are not giving well protection like this, the Nepalese people.
The security situation has degraded across South Sudan. The peaceful images splashed on UN posters throughout the capital are a far cry from the reality on the ground. Early hopes for national unity are now just memories. Independence Square, where they celebrated the birth of a new country in 2011, is abandoned. Just a few steps away, the renewed fighting of last summer began. The walls of the presidential palace are riddled with bullet holes. But it's outside of Juba where the scars of combat are most visible. Homes are destroyed by gunfire. Entire villages have been decimated. Since the beginning of the conflict 3 years ago, hundreds of thousands of people have been killed. At least 3 million have been displaced by the war. Chul buys food at the small market inside the Juba camp, not daring to risk a trip into town.
Here's £5. I'll take this mango.
Since the July attack and without official justification, UN food rations have drastically decreased. Making ends meet is even tougher now, but Chul has no choice but to stay here under international protection.
It's through here that we enter and exit. I come here often. I sit here and look out. But I can't leave. It's even more difficult for men to leave the camps. They'll be killed. We women will only be beaten or raped. There are a couple of merchants that deliver food to the camp entrance, so some people take the risk of leaving the camp by a few meters to collect things and return with them to sell in the camp.
Rape is a daily occurrence in Juba. According to the UN, 70% of women in the city have been victims of sexual violence since the beginning of the conflict. Within the camp, each family has been deeply affected by the war, which began in 2013 as a political conflict. Soon after, armed groups began targeting civilians. Many massacres were carried out and often perpetrated along ethnic lines. Chul arrived here 3 years ago. She lives with her sister and 4 children in the same shelter. As part of the Nuer tribe, they were targeted early in the fighting. Her husband was assassinated. She fled immediately.
I saw mothers and their children killed together. When that happened, I took my kids and ran because I was told that all the people I live with would be killed in the same way.
For months, the family has faced a daily struggle to scrape together enough food. And these days, camp residents are coping with even greater challenges. The merchants that sell food to the displaced and the trucks that bring them water are regularly blocked by the military.
Because of the war, access to food has become very complicated. There's no access. Some people manage to find what they need, but others don't. We are reduced to begging from our relatives.
When food is available, the family gets 1 meal a day. Chul has been forced to find other ways to provide for herself and 5 dependents. In front of her shelter, she created a small tea room where the men in the camp can come for a break. But since the crisis in July, tea and sugar prices have risen dramatically.
I can buy a bag of sugar for £20. It used to cost £5. When the sugar was cheaper and the prices were lower, I had more customers. At the end of each day, my box would be full of bills.
But her work no longer suffices. The economic crisis in the camp has grown too severe. Prices across the country have also spiked due to the war. Products are imported from Uganda along the only paved road in the country, which runs from the border to Juba. In the past, boats traveled up the Nile towards Sudan. They all passed through Malakal, the second largest city in the country. But the war has made this navigation too dangerous. Today, the area is nearly inaccessible. Only UN aircraft can fly over the Nile to get here. Nothing remains of the historic grandeur of Malakal. The pitch at the football stadium where independence was celebrated is now burnt. The destruction of the city was by design, a scorched earth policy implemented by both the army and the rebels. If either side lost, nothing would remain for their adversaries. To drive around without getting arrested, we must follow this intelligence agent. He wants to show us the main road, where he says life is slowly crawling back to normal. For several months, the government has encouraged Dinkas, the ethnic group of the president, to come back.
We want to tell all the people of South Sudan that this city belongs to everyone. No one should be scared. All is well now. You can see for yourself. People go about their business all over the city.
Meanwhile, few from other ethnic groups braved the journey back to Malakal. The military presence in the streets hints at the prospect of new massacres, but the government tries to hide this and doesn't let us film the men in uniform. Our team saw many here amongst the civilian population. Government authorities who fled during the clashes have returned. They say the massacres are over.
There is no tribal town or tribal estate. We would like to say to come and talk with our brothers who are putting forward false claims. Because Nuer were here, Chulu were here, Dinka were here, where I came from. The future of Malakal is very simple. When peace comes, it will be lived just like how people are living in in Juba.
The government narrative is that Juba is peaceful. It claims that civilians stay in the camps only to benefit from UN services without facing a real threat of violence. But in Malakal, it's clear that tens of thousands of IDPs take refuge in the camps due to an acute fear of fighting. In this Doctors Without Borders field hospital, they mostly treat illnesses caused by poor hygiene conditions.
How is the child since he has been in the hospital?
He's better. Before, he wouldn't take any milk, but now he's feeding well. What we eat here gives us no energy. Nothing can protect us from sickness. There is only one thing available in the camp: beans.
Many of the caregivers at the hospital are South Sudanese who also live in the camp. Senosi was a nurse at the hospital in Malakal when the war broke out. He sought safety here with his wife and their 5 kids in January 2014. The family has not set foot outside the camp since arriving.
Injured soldiers from the government and from the rebel side would come to the hospital and we'd treat them. I was a volunteer. In the end, I had to leave. Malakal was empty, and both sides were threatening us. So I came here to the camp. Here, I'm a lot freer.
Like Senosi, most dare not leave the UN-protected camp. Only a few women take the risk. 3 times a week, peacekeepers position themselves outside the entrance so the women can stock up on food. Here, they're cultivating a small garden. They must work quickly to minimize their exposure. Confidence in the UN is eroding after repeated attacks nearby and inside the camp. Last February, several dozen people were murdered in an attack by the army. A third of the shelters here were also destroyed.
The situation is bad here, and it's going to stay that way. If the army attack us, the men from the UN will ask us to leave with them. The soldiers could take us from under their noses without any response.
The UN acknowledged insufficient protection in a recent report. The organization recognizes shortcomings in overall assistance to civilians. Faced with these choices, some decide to flee the country altogether. The easiest way out is by boat on the Nile. But the port is under the control of government forces. It's hard to find an escape vessel. Most of the boats in the dock are wrecks. Those who do manage to sail down the Nile head towards rebel-held territory. The village of Wal Shalouk sits between the river and the marshland. Its population has increased tenfold since the beginning of the crisis. These men are representatives of the opposition. They've created their own government in the territories under their control. They claim that only civilians live here and don't admit to the presence of combatants among them. They push the claim that they are only defenseless families facing down a ruthless government. Most here belong to the Shilluk ethnicity, and Malakal is the capital of their kingdom. Like many, Stephen Aban feels he was driven out by the President Salva Kiir. He's become one of the leaders in the shadow government of this region.
One day in the future, we will return to Malakal. These guys will leave, because it's not their city. And if they don't leave, we will take it back by force. We don't want to stay here forever. We are waiting for a solution. But if the international community doesn't propose anything, we will seek justice ourselves.
The rebels have already attempted this attack several times, most recently in October. According to the government, 56 opposition fighters were killed. Throughout the country, fighting has become more frequent and ethnic tensions are on the rise. The UN claims ethnic cleansing is already underway in South Sudan. And the organization fears the worst, that the situation could descend into an all-out genocide if nothing is done to stop the violence.
Bastien Renouy and Elodie Cousin revisiting South Sudan for France 24. Well, that's all from this week's edition. You can catch it and all the other editions as well, of course, on our website, which is at france24.com. Do stay tuned. More news coming up very shortly.